Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Millie webinar. The subject of today's webinar is Millie's Guide to University Applications 101. And in this webinar, we will discuss applications to 3 university destinations: the UK, the US, and Canada. We will discuss what those applications entail, what are the requirements for each, as well as what specific admissions tests you would need to take in order to apply to each of these locations. And finally, we will also discuss application strategy, how to best strategize these applications. Now, since we have limited time, right, we can't go too in depth with each individual location, but I think this is very helpful to give a broad overview as to what the applications entail for each country and which might be best suited to your own interests and your own profile. So during this webinar, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, which you can find in your Zoom portal. I will try to occasionally check those and give detailed answers as best as I can. And if you have any questions that you feel you might want to ask more in private, there'll be a QR code in the final slide of this presentation, which you can click with your phone. And there you'll be able to also submit questions to us and also set up a one-on-one free 20-minute consultation where we can go more in depth as to what is required and how best to orient your profile for these applications. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, my name is Daniel Williams. I'm a guidance counselor, university admissions counselor for Millie. I attended Georgetown for my undergraduate degree, where I studied international relations in the School of Foreign Service with a focus on Arab culture and Arabic language and Arab politics, actually. After that, I did a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where I also taught in the English department, teaching writing to undergraduate students for 3 years. After that, I moved around teaching at various colleges and universities. And for the past 5 years or so, I've been a university admissions counselor, working with students just like yourself in order to apply to top universities around the world. We've got great results from our students at Millie. And I love this work, not only helping the students strategize their applications, but also helping them figuring out what it is that they want to do with their life and how to get there. So without further ado, let's hop into the presentation itself. So as I mentioned today, right, we're going to discuss these 3 major Uni App systems, the one in the UK, one in Canada, and one in the US. We'll also discuss standardized testing. You might have heard of these exams, the SAT, the ACT, and the Cambridge assessment. So what do each entail and which schools need which? And lastly, strategizing your application. So obviously you have a limited amount of time to apply to these universities. You have a limited amount of energy as well. So how to choose schools strategically in order to increase your chances of admission across the board. So yes, let's start with the first, the most straightforward, right? Which is the UK. So applying to the UK is relatively simple, actually. They make it very, very easy. The requirements to apply are very transparent, meaning that if you go on to either the UCAS portal, right? The UCAS portal is the application center through which you apply to all the universities in the UK. It's very clear as to what are the entry requirements that you need for each university. So it will tell you, right? You need a minimum 37 IB score, or you need an AAB predicted grades, right? Or you need 3 APs with these particular scores. So before you even begin to apply, as you build out your school list, you should be looking into different universities, finding which ones you think might match your interests intellectually and also location-wise. and determining whether or not you can actually apply there based off of your current performance in school. So very transparent. If you have the grades, right, you can apply to this particular university. And if you don't have them, right, then it's probably not going to work out. So I have a question here. No, this is just something in the chat. Okay. So for the UK, right, you only need to complete one application, one central application, this UCAS application. And that central application that you complete will then get sent out to 5 schools in the UK. You can choose up to 5 schools, right? And those schools should also be a mix, which we can talk about later, for reach schools, target schools, safety schools, right? The UCAS search engine, which is mentioned here on the left side of the screen, is the way that you're going to start doing your research into these schools. So you can go ahead and log in there, and you'll be able to locate schools based off of entry requirements, their location, right? The specific subjects that they offer. In the UK, the application is very, very straightforward. As I said before, you either have the grades or you don't. And besides that, the only other thing that you need is the UK personal statement. So because they don't really have other things like interviews, unless you're applying to Oxbridge or doing a healthcare thing, they don't really care too much about an extracurricular profile or additional exams that you would have to take. The personal statement that you write is really critical. In that personal statement, which is about 4,000 characters long, right, or 40 lines long, you can discuss your motivation for applying to these particular universities. So you have to discuss what it is that you've done in the past, what you've done in high school that makes you well suited to study this particular subject in the future, and also demonstrate a growing area with subject-specific knowledge that can show the universities in the UK that you're well suited to the degree. In the UK, your applications are read by the professors within the department to which you apply. So they don't care too much about, you know, whether you played on the football team or whether you volunteered with, some food bank or something like that. What they're more looking for is that you have studied the subject in depth at the highest level at your particular school, and you've
Yeah, everything okay?
Yes, my internet just cut out. Sorry
All
about
right,
that.
okay. No problem. You can proceed.
Okay. Okay. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. I think my Wi-Fi must have just cut out there briefly. So as I was saying, right, the personal statement is really critical because there aren't that many components to the UK application. So don't do your personal statement at the last minute. Make sure that you can go ahead and prepare that well in advance and get significant feedback to make that as good as you can. Besides the personal statement, as I mentioned, there are no interviews really in the UK, except if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, in which you will have a very important interview, right? In which you're discussing the subject you plan to study with the professors in the department that you are applying for. And if you're doing something related to healthcare. So for example, if you are going to study medicine or physiotherapy or something related to occupational therapy, some kind of healthcare oriented field, then you will need to interview. And also there's no early application in the UK. So all of the UCAS schools will have their deadlines at the end of January, except if you're applying for Oxford and Cambridge, in which you'll need to have everything prepared by October 15th, or if you're planning on studying medicine, veterinary science, or dentistry, you'll also have the early deadline of October 15th. So that's a brief overview of the UK system. Once you apply, right, you will then get your results back. Let's say you apply to 5 universities, you'll get your results back. If you meet the basic entry requirements before you apply and you write a strong personal statement, then it's very likely that you're going to get offers, right? Probably around 3, right? Some students get 4 or even all of their choices. Once you get those results back, you can then narrow that down to 2, right? Because you can only attend 1 university at the end of the day. So after you get your 5 back, you narrow it down to 2. One of them will be called your firm offer, which is kind of like your dream school, maybe the most prestigious school of the 5 that you've got your result from. And then you also want to choose a conditional offer, like for insurance, right? A backup. So the UK universities will say, this is your conditional offer. We will let you in if you can meet these predicted grades for your end of year assessments. If you meet those grades, no problem, right? You've given your firm offer and you will go off to university. If for some reason you don't meet that firm offer or that conditional offer, then you would have to choose your conditional offer, your backup school, which may have slightly less competitive requirements. So once you get your results back from the 5 schools, you choose 2, one as your firm offer, your dream school with higher requirements, one that is your insurance offer with lower requirements, just in case something happens on exam day or you don't get the grades that you were thinking of, you can still go to university.
Daniel, your presentation is not on.
Oh, really? Okay, one moment. Let's see why. Okay, how about now?
Yeah, this is fine.
Okay. Okay, so as I mentioned before, right, these are the, this is the UCAS portal, which you can find online. And this is very helpful because if you're looking to see what universities offer the courses that you're interested in, you can go ahead and search using this portal. So if you want to study law, for example, you would type in law in the search bar. You can choose undergraduate at the study level, as well as the entry year that you plan to join. You can even, right, narrow the search down by location. So you could enter in the postcode or the specific address, right? Let's say you only want to study in London, and that will narrow down your choices, and then you can choose between them as to which one you want to apply for. Let's see. Okay. Now let's talk about the most complicated university application system, right? This would be the US application. So like the UK, right, there is a central portal known as the Common App, which you would use to apply to all of the different schools, with the exception of a few schools. So for example, Georgetown University doesn't use the Common App. MIT doesn't use the Common App. Right? There are some other universities also that don't use the Common App, but most of them do. Over 800 schools in America, right, use the Common Application. Just like the UCAS portal, it's a central location that holds all of your information. And when you apply to the universities, that central location, that central portal will send out your application to all the ones on your list. Now, the components of a US application are also much more in-depth and much more complicated. Whereas in the UK, it's basically, do you meet these entry requirements and is your personal statement strong, right? In the US, there are many more other factors. For example, you would need to fill out an activities and awards profile. You would need to submit letters of recommendation. You would need to submit your SAT scores or your ACT scores. Right? You would need to write various essays instead of one personal statement. There is one large Common App personal statement that gets sent out to all the different universities. But in addition to that, each individual school that you apply to may also have their own essays. So for example, let's say you're applying to Stanford. You'd write your main personal statement, right? 650 words. But for Stanford, you'd also write 11 smaller essays that you need to complete for that specific school. Or for Boston University, there's 2 questions, right? Or for Georgetown, there's 4 questions. So it's much more in-depth, much more writing intense in the US, right? So in addition to writing this main essay where you talk about who you are as a candidate, you also have to answer all these other smaller essays. So much more work involved there. And you want to also be starting this as soon as possible, right? Nobody does their best work when they work at the last minute. So working ahead is critical here. So how do you figure out where you want to apply in the US? In the UK, it was very straightforward. You either meet the entry requirements or you don't, and you can use that UCAS search portal to determine that or not. In the US, because it's a holistic admissions process, and there are so many other factors at play, right? Then it's less easy to determine whether, you're going to get admitted or not. You can find within the CDS reports, the internal data of each school, the average SAT score, or the average GPA, but some schools don't show that, and these are also fluctuating all the time. So the best way to research schools in the US is to read university guides, right? So for example, there's one called the Good University Guide. There's one called the FISC Guide, right? You can also look up the US News rankings of schools for your particular degree. If you want to study psychology, what are the top 20 psychology programs for undergraduate in America? You can do it that way. And you can also attend university admission talks. So for example, all of the universities in the US, if you can't visit on campus, also give virtual admission presentations where an admissions officer will get online and talk to you about what the school has to offer. They will talk about certain developments, maybe even what they're looking for in candidates. And many US universities also take into consideration demonstrated interest, which means, are you sincerely interested in attending the school? Have you demonstrated that interest by attending admission talks or going for a campus visit? So these admission talks are really useful and very helpful for you to get a sense of where to apply and also how to strategize your application to meet the needs of that particular school. So yes, you apply to the university separately, but through this central portal called the Common App. The US personal statement is also essential, just like the UK. But whereas in the UK, the personal statement focused on your academic skills and how you've explored that subject in the classroom and outside the classroom, in the US, the personal statement is totally different. So it focuses more on who you are as a person, how you see the world. Is there some challenge that you've overcome, or something you understood about yourself, or some struggle that you had, or some insecurity, or something you're really proud of, right? So it's more of a personal story. In the UK, we saw no interviews except if you're applying for Oxbridge, and also if you're applying for healthcare, because they want to know, can you talk with your patients, right? In the US, it's possible that you can sign up for an interview. Some schools will require an interview, and some schools will give you the option to interview with alumni who have attended that school in the past. Even if the school says that those interviews are not evaluative, they are, because after each alumni interview, the alumnus will send a report to the school about the conversation and give their assessment of the candidate. So you want to prepare for that in advance as well. Do your school research, as I said, through these university admission talks, and come prepared to that interview to discuss specific details about the school that prove that it's the perfect fit for you. And lastly, as we saw in the UK, no early applications except for Oxford, Cambridge, and if you want to study dentistry, healthcare, veterinary science. In the US, there are early applications. You might have heard of ED, EA, ED2, regular decision, restricted early action, right? So quite complicated. But basically, it means that you're allowed to apply early to certain schools for some kind of advantage. If you apply early action, there's not really an admission advantage, but you will get your results back by December 15th. So you apply by November 1, get your results back by December 15th. That's an advantage because you can then strategize where else you apply to based on whether you get accepted or not. There's also early decision in the US. Early decision is a legally binding commitment that you make to a university, saying that if you admit me, I promise to withdraw all the other applications from my other universities in exchange for a higher acceptance rate. So the universities will have a higher admission rate for ED candidates because they want to ensure that students attend their university. So early applications also possible. But as you can see, right, it's much more complicated in the US than the UK, right? There are more factors involved, right? There's a possibility to interview. There's more options to strategize the application because more factors are at play. So generally speaking, if you are someone who does very, very well at school, but is not so involved outside of the classroom, then the UK is the better option in terms of where you apply, because that's really all that they're looking for, right? Your grades and the personal statement. If you are someone who might not perform so well within the classroom, but is very active outside the classroom with clubs and internships and sports and volunteering, then the US might be a better place for you to submit your application because they take into account this holistic evaluation. Okay. So that's the US, that's the UK. And the last one that we'll speak about today is Canada. Canada is also relatively straightforward. Unlike in the US and the UK, there's no central portal that you use to apply to all your different schools. You apply to each university separately. However, there may be some regional portals that you use to apply to, for example, universities that are located in Ontario or universities that are located in Alberta. If the university you want to apply for is located in either of those provinces, then you can apply through their central portal. So the Ontario University Application Center is one of them. The Alberta, Apply Alberta is another one. But most of them you'll apply directly through the university, right? One by one by one. Just like in America, you want to attend university admission talks, right, to show demonstrated interest, but also to figure out what's going on at the university and what are their strengths. So you can repeat that back to them in their essays if they have them. And also you should check the individual university websites for their entry requirements. So some Canadian universities need to see high-level math, high-level chemistry, or high-level physics. So make sure that before you apply there, you meet those requirements. Or if you know that you're aiming for one Canadian university that has these specific requirements, understand this ahead of time so that you can work with your counselor at school to ensure that you take these higher level classes to make yourself eligible to apply. Regarding the essays, some Canadian universities have them, some don't. Some have a personal statement, some don't. So basically, you have to check for each individual school, right? There's no central requirement. There may be interviews given by a university. There may not be interviews being given by a university. Again, it's school by school. And there's no early application generally, right? The deadlines may differ between the schools. Some will be earlier than others, but you don't have the strategic early applications like we saw in the US, right? Where you can apply early in exchange for some kind of admission benefit that doesn't exist in California. So that's the brief overview of the three Uni App systems, right? The UK, the US, and Canada. So I'll just pause now in case there are any questions. If there are any questions, please go ahead and put them either in the Q&A or the chat feature, and I'll do my best to answer. Okay, no questions. Then let's move on to standardized testing. So this is another component of your applications. Depending on where you apply, you may or not have to take admissions tests outside of what you're doing in school. So let's discuss these options, what each requires, what's involved, and how important they are relative to each location. So the first one, right, that I'm sure many of you have heard of before is known as the SAT. The SAT has gone completely digital now, right? It used to be you could take paper-based exams, but now whether you're international or whether you're based in the US, you'll have to take a digital version of the SAT. The digital version is shorter, right? It comes with a timer on screen. Some students are saying that it's easier because it's not as long, so there's less stamina involved. Others are saying that it's more difficult. So it just depends, really. But the SAT is going to test you on two different subjects. One will be reading and writing, which is a mix of reading questions and grammar questions and vocabulary questions. And the other is a math section, right? One with a calculator, one without a calculator. Your total score for the SAT will come to 1,600, 800 for the reading and writing, and 800 for the math, right? 1,600 would be a perfect score, but students usually will perform better in one section than the other to create some kind of composite. The good scores, right, that you will need for applying to, let's say, Ivy League or top universities in America is generally 1,500. So 1,500 out of 1,600. That'll put you in the top 1% of test takers worldwide, and that will make your SAT score very competitive, right? But it's not necessary if you're applying to somewhat less competitive schools, right? The admission requirements will be less. However, unlike in the UK, where you have to score a certain amount in school in order to be able to apply, for the SAT, there's no minimum requirement. In fact, the SAT has gone mostly optional for many of the universities. So you should try and take it because it'll make the difference between two candidates on paper. If one student has a high SAT score, one doesn't, or one doesn't submit, then the university is going to go for the one that has a stronger score. But if for some reason you cannot perform well in this exam, you do not actually have to submit a score. So look at the second point here, right? Test blind, test optional. What does this even mean? Okay, so universities, in the wake of various ideas about the SAT and its relevance to a candidate's ability to perform well at university, have decided, some schools will say test blind, meaning you can submit an SAT score, right? But we're not even going to consider it. We won't even look at it. So for example, the UC schools, the top public universities in the world, UCLA, UC Berkeley, right? There are many others, San Diego, Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, etc. If you take the SAT, you cannot even put it on the application. They're test blind, meaning we won't even look at it. Test optional, however, means that you can choose to submit an SAT score, or you can choose not to submit an SAT score, right? Some will say that it's beneficial to submit one, right? It's always beneficial if you can get a good score. And there are a few actually that still require the SAT. So remember how I told you MIT, Georgetown, they have their own separate application for the US. Those two schools require SAT, so you can't get out of the requirement, right? So the key to performing well on the SAT is to start early, right? So it's not necessarily an overly complicated test. Some would say it doesn't even measure intelligence. It just is measuring your understanding of a very specific set of subject. And if you have enough time to practice, right, and you have a strong tutor who can explain the material to you clearly, you should be fine. But the key to this is starting early, just like with your essays. So you want to look on the College Board website and decide when you want to take the exam, right? And then prepare several months ahead of that, right? So that you're not trying to cram everything at the last minute. So planning out your test dates is important. You also want to probably not take the exam more than 3 times, right? It's not necessary. And the schools will also super score. So if you take your exam twice and you get higher in one section on one exam and higher in another section on another exam, they will put those together to form a composite. So they'll take your highest score in each section across multiple tests and combine them for a super score. And as I mentioned, yes, the SAT has changed its format. It's digital only, right? So all the practice work that you do, right, you should be practicing digitally so that you can basically face the same exam when you step into the examination room on test day. Besides the SAT, in the US, there's also the ACT. The ACT sort of measures the same thing, with the exception that it also has a science section. The SAT does not have a science section. And this score is out of 36, right? So this also is no longer paper and pencil based test. It's only computer based test. And there is an optional essay for the ACT, right? It's not really necessary, I think, for the US schools. But I will say this, the Canadian schools also will accept the SAT and the ACT. Some will require it, some won't be asking for it, but say that you could submit if need be. So whether you're applying to the US or Canada, the SAT or the ACT is helpful. And even if you're applying to the UK, right? Some schools will also accept an SAT score, high SAT score, to lower the entry requirements. So maybe they'll say like 39 IB, right, is the entry requirements, or a 37 IB plus 1360 or higher on the SAT. So regardless of where you're applying, right, the SAT or the ACT can be a very beneficial thing to take. What I would recommend you do is to take a practice exam for the SAT, take a practice exam for the ACT, see which score comes back higher relative to each other. There's a concordance table where you can compare, and go with the exam that you have a better baseline score with. It means that you're intellectually more suited to that particular exam. And at Millie, right, we offer free SAT diagnostics every single month. So if you're interested in that, please go ahead and write to us in the chat. The host will see that, and can be able to help you sign up for those monthly exams, right? You'll be able to get your score back. You can meet with a Millie advisor who can talk about the next steps and also your relative performance on that exam. Or you can wait until the end of this presentation. There's a QR code in the final slide. You can use your phone to click that, and you should be able to set up an appointment, right? So that's the SAT and the ACT. There are also Cambridge assessment, right? These are other exams that you sometimes need to take if you're applying to certain schools in the UK. So certain majors offered by Oxford or Cambridge, and also Imperial, right? On the math and engineering side, Imperial sometimes requires these exams. So they're known by many different names, right? There's the PAT for physics, the MAT for maths, the HAT for history, right? There's the TMUA, there's the UCAT for medicine. So depending on what specific major you're going to apply for in the UK and what school you're applying for, you may have to take one of these exams. How do you apply? How do you take these exams? The first thing you want to do is to find the Cambridge Assessment Center that is closest to you. If you're attending an international school and students typically apply to the UK, it's very, very likely that your high school will offer the Cambridge assessments. So that's the easiest thing, right? You speak to your school and they can go ahead and set that up for you, right? You just take it there, which is great because you're familiar with the location. If your school does not offer the Cambridge assessments, then the British Council in your area also administers most of these Cambridge tests. You may have to pay a registration fee or something like that, but it's also possible. And if there's no British Council nearby, you can also register via another test site. So you go to your Cambridge assessment website, you type in your zip code, and various locations will pop up for you. You choose the one that's the most convenient for you. If you also are going to study law or medicine, then you won't take a Cambridge assessment, but you will take another similar exam, right? These are not given through the Cambridge assessment site. They're given through Pearson website, right? But they're also required for certain schools. So again, through the UCAS portal, through that search button that we looked at earlier, you can determine the exact requirements for each school, right? If the school requires these exams, then you want to go ahead and register for them in advance and also prepare for the exams in advance, right? So you can look and find past papers online, as well as the previous performance of students who are admitted to different schools. Cambridge released that data, Oxford releases that data. And you can see based off of your practice test, how close you are to that target score. If you're close, great. A little bit more studying should push you over the edge and you'll do fine. If there's a big gap between what you have taken for the practice exam and what they're looking for, it's best to find a tutor, right? Because this is critical to your admission. So that's on the Cambridge assessment side. The US schools will not accept Cambridge assessment. The Canadian schools will not accept Cambridge assessment. So this is just limited to the UK and just limited to a handful of schools and a handful of major within those schools. So it may not be required at all. Check the entry requirements for the specific schools to see whether you need to do it. Okay. Now, let's end by talking about how to strategize your application, right? Application strategy is critical. Admission rates to universities all around the world have reached all-time lows. In the US, the numbers are out of control, right? If you're applying to Ivy League universities, you're looking at admission rates of 4%, 5%, 6%, meaning that out of 100 applications, right, 95 of them are going in the bin. So it's very important to think about what's going to most increase your chances of admission and how to choose schools, right, that are going to give you the most number of offers at the end of the day. So you don't want to apply to only Ivy League schools. Those could come back as all rejections. You don't only want to apply to Oxford and Cambridge, right? That could also come back as a rejection. There are so many hundreds of other amazing schools, right, that still carry the same international name brand recognition and have top research facilities and all that. So don't just limit your search to only the ones that you think are in the top 5 or 10, right? That's not a good application strategy. The best way to strategize your applications is to divide your schools up into reach, match, and safety schools. So the first thing you want to do is to find out from your school, how many universities can I apply to? Some high schools will say you can only apply to 10 universities. Some high schools may say you can only apply to 8. Some may say you can apply to as many as you want. If the school says you can only apply to 10, then the best thing to do is to apply to 1 to 3 reach schools, right? So 1 to 3 schools that are highly, highly competitive. A dream school. It would be amazing if somehow you were admitted there, right? But they're so competitive that it's best to only apply to a handful of them. Match schools, where we think that, yeah, the students' grades and test scores are kind of on par with what the universities are looking for. So we have a pretty good chance of getting in there. That should be around 4 to 6 schools. The majority of them should be match schools. And then also 2 to 3 safety schools as well, right? Where we think that you have a high likelihood of getting accepted there. Maybe the admission requirements are not as stringent. Maybe the admission rates are higher. It doesn't mean that this school is less competitive, or it doesn't mean that it isn't as strong. It just means that perhaps the admission rates are higher because it's a large public university, so it can admit more students or whatever. Now, you don't want to add any school to your list for the safety schools that you wouldn't be excited to attend. There's no point putting on your list of schools a school that you know that if you got admitted to, you wouldn't go to, right? But you still need that backup just because of how competitive the admissions landscape is today. So 1 to 3 reach schools, 4 to 6 match schools, 2 to 3 safety schools. This is a well-rounded list that is going to give you a handful of offers that you can then compare side by side to make your decision. So let's say that you apply to a safety school, right? Maybe less competitive, but they give you a big scholarship. Or you get into a reach school, but no scholarship whatsoever. At that point, you can look at your options and say, I think actually the safety school might be the better fit because it's going to put less financial burden on my family. Or the reach school is the better fit because, the name brand recognition, and I've always dreamed of going there. Or maybe the match school is the better fit because it kind of toes the line with both of them. And maybe the match school has, better research facilities. So like the state schools, for example, they're very well funded. So they have top research facilities in the STEM areas, science, engineering, technology. They have tons of money being pumped into the school for those specific subjects. So maybe you decide for that, right? The idea is to apply broadly, get your results back, and then look at them and make your decision that way, right? So you don't just want to confine yourselves to reach schools. That's going to be a very risky strategy. Okay, and here are some final resources, right, that you can use in order to start doing your school research. So the Times Higher Education is known for its rankings of universities around the world. US News also has its own rankings, which it uses to determine the top universities in the US. And The Guardian also has a university guide, which is very, very helpful and reveals their own rankings of UK universities as well. I would say also take these rankings with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that the ones that are ranked at the top are the best fit for you, or even the best fit for your major. For example, engineering. In the US, right, we think of the top universities as Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the Ivy League universities. But actually, if you want to apply for engineering, there are some universities that might be lower ranked, but have better facilities, and for that specific subject like engineering are actually ranked higher. So a few come to mind: Purdue University, University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, right? UIUC is fantastic for engineering, even though on the overall ranking, they might be slightly lower. For engineering, they're higher than the Ivies. So when you look at these rankings, look at the ranking based on the subject that you plan to apply for, as opposed to the general ranking, which will include random things like the university's endowment. How much money do alumni give back to the school? That will determine where the university is ranked overall, but might not be a relevant factor for you to consider, right? For general research, right, you can also use the College Board's website, which is the location we talked about for how to register for the SAT. You can use the FISC guide to colleges, which you can find to give detailed information on each university, their strengths, what they have on campus, the various clubs and organizations, what they're known for. The Common App also has a search function where you can look into the data for each of the schools, like their deadline, right, the size of the school, and also the UCAS portal, which we also discussed earlier, is a fantastic resource for figuring out the entry requirements, right, where you want to apply based on location in the UK. And then aside from these, as I mentioned before, the best thing that you can do is to either visit the college in person to get a sense of what's going on campus and do a tour that way, or you can do a virtual tour. These universities have virtual information sessions every month where you can sign up, and that's also helping your demonstrated interest, proving to the university that you want to go there because they have a track record of you attending talks by the universities or actually going to campus. So these are the resources that I would suggest you look into. Okay. So that's it in terms of the presentation, right? I think we got a good overview of the different Uni App systems in the US, the UK, and Canada, what is required for each, how to go about starting your university research, what tests you need to take and when to take them, right? So of course, right, we could talk about this for hours and go more in depth, but because time is limited, right, I think this gives us a good overview. Let me just pause here and see if there are any questions or if anyone has anything that they would like to ask before I wrap this up. I'll just give it a minute to see if any questions come through. Okay, it looks like no questions. So if you do have questions that you want to ask and don't feel comfortable asking here, or is a more niche or personalized question that you think would be better addressed by a Millie mentor, please go ahead and either email us, or you can scan the QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of this screen and book a free one-on-one consultation with one of our mentors who can discuss more in depth with you about where you should be applying, the next steps that you should take, and the various services that we offer to our students to make that process easier and more successful. Furthermore, if you're interested in taking our free SAT practice exam, which we give out every single month, go ahead and scan that QR code in the bottom right-hand corner, right? That will allow you to register for a free SAT diagnostic. Your score will come back and a mentor will go over that score with you to discuss next steps and where you stand in relation to the kind of schools that you're looking for. So with that said, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. All right. It's great to be able to connect in this manner, and I look forward to seeing you on a Millie webinar sometime soon. Thank you very much and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.